We are spoiled. It seems like every network and streaming service has animated shows that have couples, good, bad, and indifferent. However, when growing up, that wasn't the case for me. SpongeBob? No romance built into it at all. Valentine's Day was purely platonic, and Mrs. Puff and Mr. Krabs wouldn't be visited in detail until well into my adulthood. Fairly Odd Parents? The main character liked a popular girl who was well out of his depth, and the relationship wouldn't even work if you saw my video on it. And the other interest is someone that said main character didn't even like, barely tolerated, in a world where the men were stupid and the women were crazy. Ed, Edd, and Eddy? Also watched that. Everyone had a crush on one girl in the cul-de-sac. The only girl around the same age as them within the cul-de-sac, which is nuts. The other relationship would be the one without consent. Foster's home, Mac literally likes someone above his age, by a lot. Not really the type of couple anyone should be looking for. Teenage Robot? Do you mean when Jenny would find someone realize that they were a jerk, or Sheldon for almost all that time fought for any form of validation? Courage, Muriel, and Eustace, sure, but that wasn't my age. For every Danny Phantom and Kids Next Door show we had that did have love interest in it, there were like 5 to 10 that didn't. At least growing up for me, it wasn't a common occurrence. But nowadays you have Mrs. Puff and Mr. Krabs built out, Lincoln and Ronnie Ann and Loud House, regular show has plenty, Gumball and Darwin each had girlfriends, Amity and Luz has a lot of attention, and don't even get me started on Steven Universe. And that's just network shows. The kids growing up today, they can have boys liking girls, girls liking boys. In fact, we got a little bit risky. Girls liking girls. Oh man, I can't wait for boys liking boys in 2030. On behalf of 2000s kids, back then boys were just gross and stupid and girls were icky and nice smelling, and that's pretty much how it went for a majority of shows growing up. However, it's time to pack your Lunchables, pretend to send your Neopets to the Neo Lodge, but really you just leave them starving like the next generation would do with their Minecraft dogs, and grab your tiny skateboards that were just for your fingers, because we're getting stranded. Also plug in my Discord. Of course, it starts with Jimmy and Cindy arguing, and in hindsight, the argument was really stupid.
I'm telling you that you can't see the equator.
Just in unpopulated areas like the Pacific Ocean.
Wrong! The equator is invisible, and apparently so is your brain.
Well, at least my head doesn't need its own time zone.
Why do you have to go there?
But it is a good thing that the argument is stupid, because it only demonstrates the point that the episode makes beautifully. In what way does the equator being visible or not help them at all in life? It doesn't. It's a meaningless argument to mask the fact that they actually don't mind spending time with each other, and they get some enjoyment out of this, even if their tone may make it seem like they don't. When you have a generic school bully telling you that he can't focus on bullying because of your arguing, and knowing that Jimmy is a nerd who probably doesn't want his coconut cracked by generic bullies'
big meaty claws!
That's an example of a person Jimmy actually doesn't care for, but Cindy, no. Jimmy cares about Cindy quite a bit. So much that he's willing to blow off school to fly to the equator just for her, even if it is just to prove her wrong.
What's wrong, Libby?
Is anyone else getting a little tired of Jimmy and Cindy's love-hate thing?
Well, what do you mean?
You know, the way they argue to mask their true feelings for each other.
Even though a very Jimmy and Cindy-centric episode and thus review, the MVPs of this episode are actually in the back of the hovercraft. I mean, let's face it, it's easier to see these kinds of flaws in other people before you see it in yourself. The episode also builds on Sheen's eccentric quirks, Carl's over-emotional dependence, and Libby's sassy but completely over it attitude, which creates this dynamic that would not only rival shows today, but blow some of those shows completely out of the water. And if you don't believe me, watch this clip.
Hold up, you mean when they argue that means they love each other?
Exactly.
Oh, so when Jimmy says he hates when I sneeze on his experiments, he loves it?
And when Cindy says she'd love me to stay 100 feet away from her at all times, she wants me to stand right next to her?
You know what? Forget I mentioned it.
Just chef's kiss. They really carry this episode and support the obvious lead of Jimmy and Cindy's unkindled attraction. When they reach the equator, of course, there's nothing there, so Cindy is wrong, but she's not gonna give up that easily. A small detail here is that Cindy can't admit that she's wrong, mostly because of pride, but because then the conversation would be over, and neither of them really want the conversation to be over. I mean, look at the equator argument at school. She calls Jimmy's head big, and that has nothing to do with the argument at all. They inch forward and fall out because who cares about safety when you're trying to prove someone right? An important piece of info here is that Jimmy presses on this one button to turn the autopilot on before they are to fall.
I'll save you guys! So high. high. So very high.
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
While Carl is fainting from the heights, Sheen is trying to get the hoverboard off of autopilot by trying to brute force the steering wheel, and Libby is singing as her friends get abandoned in the ocean. Not the best look for any of them. Now gather around because I have a theory. I remember back in my Loud House movie review, one of the things that got on my nerves was in the beginning, there was this basic line of sight not seen by the family when the Loud sisters hit Lincoln away from the table. Now as we see here, Jimmy presses a button that has the words autopilot above it in big bold letters. This is not a switch that is hidden or voice activated or any complex machinery like that. It is a visible button with a visible title, and if Sheen is seen here tearing things out, he would have seen it, guaranteed, and no amount of, oh, Sheen's crazy or he's in the moment sort of excuses is gonna convince me otherwise. My theory is that he didn't care. He was never going to get another opportunity to rip out things from Jimmy's hovercraft again. He was already energetic, giving a pep talk to Libby and Carl about finding Jimmy and Cindy, plus he laughs like a maniac when hanging upside down from a hovercraft, putting his friends in danger as well.
Burglar.
Quiet, you!
Burglar.
I said be quiet!
Burglar. Step away from the vehicle. Burglar.
If Sheen was your Uber driver, what would you do? Because clearly it isn't survive. So before we get into this, a disclaimer. The rest of this episode follows the dynamic of Jimmy and Cindy when they are away from everyone, and it's fantastic. Not because I needed to see it, but because they wrote it in a way that even if you wanted this more than anything, they gave you pretty much everything they could in a 22-minute format. Believe it or not, I still love Jimmy Neutron, and the Jimmy, Cindy, hate, love aspect didn't have a big impact on why I like the show. They could have went forward with it in season 3 because Stranded is in season 3, and I'm pretty sure I would still like the show about the same because my liking of the show has nothing to do with that ship. Plus, I've just never been the type to aggressively push a ship and need that ship to happen for my enjoyment of the show to be valid. Even with Darwin and Carrie, one that I thought was quite enjoyable, if they left it in the air, it's not like Darwin or Carrie wouldn't be short of great episodes, or even Gumball itself, like the actual show, would still have great episodes even if that ship wasn't official. Even with Clarence, Mystery Girl, an episode I really enjoyed. It's not necessary to my enjoyment of Clarence. So I wanted to prep you as we get into the Stranded elements because about 60 to 80% of it is Jimmy and Cindy.
Of all the people to be stranded on a desert island with, I end up with you.
Well, you wouldn't exactly crack my top 10. I'd rather be stranded with Attila the Hun.
Well, I'd rather be stranded with Crazy Louie the Vagrant. At least he could use his good tooth to open coconuts.
The other 20-ish%, Carl, Libby, Sheen, they all get control over the hovercraft again, and Jimmy and Cindy, with no one around, still continue to argue, but you'll notice a shift as we get more into it, and it happens quickly, considering we're talking about two kids with zero survival skills on a stranded island with no assurance that help is on the way. Now maybe my humor is a bit cracked or underdeveloped, but hear me out as I build this next scene. They decide on splitting up, a bad idea, and gather food separately. Jimmy gets hit on the head with the coconut, and while that is funny, Cindy grabs a very suspicious bunch of bananas that have no other fruit or anything around it, and the millisecond that her hands separate the bunch from any other thing that was around it, whatever it grew, this monkey comes out of nowhere to put hands, feet, elbows, knees all over Cindy. And maybe it's because I know the power of monkeys, or the fact that this monkey was just ready on site, ready to take the bananas back over Cindy's cold dead hands, but it's just so hilariously aggro that I died twice from laughing at it. I'm 100% sure it wasn't meant to be that funny, but when you factor in what I said, plus the fact that we're seeing some rather dated CGI, it's just hilarious. It's like one of those jokes that'll just get better as we progress more in 3D animation. They decide to make a truce because arguing, at this point, it's gonna get one or both of them legitimately hurt.
Okay, we're pretty close to where Jimmy and Cindy went over, so let's split up tasks, okay? I'll navigate
Whoa. What? You're back to where you last saw Jimmy and Cindy? I call sus on that. Here's my case. There is a scene before this where once Sheen gets the autopilot off, they're confused in which direction to go, but somehow they found the exact spot in the Pacific Ocean where two of their friends fell over. In a moment where no one would have possibly put to memory the coordinates of where they are, this is actually really dumb when you think about it, because A, either they have some sort of mechanism within the hovercraft that Sheen didn't chuck out that would indicate the last time that Jimmy was seen, which is not true. They don't have that doesn't exist, and they never showed it. B, they brute forced every single direction and somehow got lucky, which also isn't true, because it was explicitly said in the beginning of the episode that Jimmy
Only have enough run fuel for a few hours.
So there is no way that they tried out each direction before the gas ran out. So it has to be C. Libby is full of it. They got lucky. Everyone vote Libby. Libby's the imposter, but it doesn't matter because Libby is so awesome. The story logic can take a few inconsistencies if it means being as funny as it is. But back to Jimmy and Cindy.
We have to find a spring while it's still daylight. A person can only go 96 hours without water.
Well, there must be water here somewhere. What else could keep these plants alive? Oh, Jimmy! Look out! Whoa! What is it?
Venus flytrap. Really big Venus flytrap.
Oh, I thought Jimmy was annoying. Oh, I thought Cindy was rude. I knew it. I knew it. The mask was gonna slip. The
Monster's been exposed!
It only took Jimmy's near death for them to even start acknowledging that at the base level, they do care about each other. And if you think this is because of the truce, you're wrong. You're actually dead wrong. Speaking of care, the level of care put into this jungle, on a tangent, is actually quite fantastic. It looks like something I would see in a 3D platformer on the PS2 or Xbox Classic, which, speaking of, which one did you prefer? I want to see what type of subscriber base I have, but getting back to it, they cleverly hint to a giant spider with this giant empty spider web. We also get Jimmy saving Cindy after Cindy saved Jimmy, showing that their care is mutual, which is very much needed, and both of them take a leap of faith, considering the alternative here was dealing with some oddly synchronized snakes.
What's that sound? Carl, you're supposed to watch our readings.
I am, they're fine.
Well, what's the fuel gauge say?
It's fine, it's on E for engorged with gas.
While Jimmy and Cindy avoid death together, realizing that their efforts is better together than their efforts apart, we start to see the cracks form within the trio of Libby, Carl, and Sheen. Even though they're all friends, it was very clear that Carl and Sheen are closer to Jimmy and Libby is closer to Cindy, which is very important because it explains why they band together but can't necessarily work together. They're oddballs, Libby to a lesser extent, although she did sing for an hour or so when Jimmy and Cindy were in the water thinking that that was a good idea, but...
Is everybody okay?
Well, I'm a little concerned that we're stranded in the middle of the ocean!
Calm down, Sheen.
Don't tell me to calm down. This is all your fault. Anybody with a brain knows E stands for... help yourself to some gas!
That's a great line. That line should be immortalized in the Library of Congress. But you want to know why this is actually really good? Beyond the jokes, beyond the iconic characters, beyond the stakes being raised, we're halfway through the episode and everything shifted. Carl and Sheen were being very calm, cooperative, and Libby was the one to point out how ridiculous it is that they can start fighting at the drop of a dime. And Cindy and Jimmy were fighting all over the place. Now, Cindy and Jimmy are cooperative, not fighting at all in the face of danger, and Carl, Libby, and Sheen are the ones fighting all the time. They swapped, and it showed that they are not above being argumentative with each other. This trio is not as mature as they may seem, and they're kids, so it's completely natural. But getting back to the duo, they're now completely safe because in cartoon life, there are no predators hanging around rivers and lakes. There are no predators that exist within the deep waters of a rainforest. All predators are for the most part gone, and they tried to explain it with Jimmy saying that they just need to stay away from the denser part of the jungle, but still. Jimmy should be chow for alligators right now.
Jimmy, why do you think we always fight back home?
Oh, that's easy. Because, well, maybe because... I don't remember.
I don't either. I mean, I know I'm not supposed to like you, but being here on this island, away from school and grades and peer pressure, it makes me realize how ridiculous that is. You're a really cool person.
We kind of get to the gist of all of this, don't we? This idea that when you take out needing to be cool in front of people that you want approval from, the stress from school, the societal norms, they aren't the worst couple in the show. It's not the worst combination of people that I've seen. I think when you take away the competitive nature from the both of them, they have a similar enough personality. Now, in fairness, this could be all of the near-death experiences speaking for them, but when you see them episode to episode, pretty much do the same song and dance with each other, I'm pretty sure they felt this way for a while, and I do think they both enjoyed a challenge of challenging each other.
Look, I know all about the whole you and Neutron thing.
Thing? What thing? There is no thing. We don't have a thing.
Yeah, right. Just relax and keep out of my face. He's all yours.
Yes!
It is There's also just a genuinely sweet and wholesome moment where they decide to drop the arguing and actually hang out together, realizing that it actually isn't as bad as they anticipated. It only took social isolation, but no one ever said that Cindy or Jimmy weren't stubborn people. To balance out the mushy, slower A-side, we get back to the trio.
Carl, I've loved you like a brother, and I know you felt the same.
Oh, yeah,
Best friend. Hey! Are you eating something? Yes, you are, you little fake!
It is the breaking point between the three, and for good reason. Sheen has been the loud, hyperactive, impulsive one, while his not-so-quick thinking saved them from flying in a straight line after many tries, and even though he probably kept their spirits up and was a big fan of doing this trip in the first place, he barely listened to Libby. It was super aggro on Carl when there were other ways to go about it. Carl was super over-emotional, overly dependent, just a soft boy who did hoard food and not know how to read a fuel gauge, and also tried to save Jimmy and Cindy but didn't know how. But he was unnecessarily picked on by Sheen, and everyone already kinda knew that he was a soft boy. Libby was a sassy voice of reason who, while appeared mature on the surface, had a laughably bad idea that turned into a hopeless venture as they were in over their head. However, it didn't help that she had two doofs that were not helping that much either. It is the perfect trio of madness. But it gets even worse.
It's an ocean liner! Try to get their attention! Jimmy must keep a flare in the hover car. Look around! Maybe this is it.
for emergencies only.
This is an emergency, push it!
It should be noted that it is nighttime in this shot, and in the next shot, Jimmy and Cindy are seen waking up. And nothing is wrong with this, of course. It seems natural. They were looking in the oceans for hours and hours, and I get that part. But I would imagine the collective 5 families that didn't see their kids come home from school would be losing their minds. Good thing it's never mentioned in this episode. They show that Jimmy and Cindy are having a great time, and that's very important because this is all showing that Jimmy and Cindy could have been more. It was a great tease. And yes, they only show the mushy parts, and that makes sense for what happens at the end, but it should be noted that if they wanted to kickstart a relationship out of this, there's nothing to say that it couldn't have been written into the episodes in a casual manner, the way that in other shows, a relationship could be acknowledged, but not the focal point of a show. Jimmy and Cindy could still be competitive and fighting with each other for no reason, but it can still be a solid relationship as we see once this episode ends. At the very least, this is service to Jimmy Neutron fans to see a couple that was slowly built to over the course of 3 seasons finally get that moment. In fact, I would take Jimmy and Cindy over Timmy and Trixie any day. In fact, even Timmy and Cindy. However, all good things must come to an end as Carl not only finds land, but the specific island that Jimmy and Cindy swam to. Mind you, I'm not docking points because this is unrealistic, but I just find it funny is all. As they meet each other again, Sheen thinking this entire thing is a mirage, and for good reason. It should be noted that Cindy immortalized her affection for Jimmy in a tree. This is important later.
Looks like I can make the necessary adjustments with my watch. And with fuel made from elements on the island, we can be back home in a few hours.
Oh, that's great news.
It should be noted that earlier in this episode, Cindy was completely okay with living on this island off eggs, coconuts, and fresh water for the rest of her life. She was okay with no more lessons after school. School itself, actually, her family, his family, their friends, her future in Retroville was now irrelevant. Jimmy never once really spoke his feelings about it, but he was shown to be at the very least not against it, until the hovercraft came into play. When you factor in what she said before, she appears to just be red-pilled to the vast amount of influences of a modern life as a kid in school, and when removed from it all, realizes that she can be fine without it, at least for now. Libby interrogates her about it and nothing really comes out of it because this is just supposed to exist in a vacuum, so they can't really say too much. We do get to the big fight, and it was with the spider that was hinted to before. Again, solid storytelling with Sheen finding the spider's eggs and having them all have to save the day together. However, the fight itself is your typical cartoon fight, but this part is pretty important.
Jimmy!
What is it, Cindy?
We don't have to go!
Huh? What are you talking about?
We can conquer the spider together, like we did everything else. And we can rebuild our tree houses and avoid the jungle and stay on the island, just the 2 of us. We don't have to go!
And even though her best friend Libby sniffed everything out, even though that spider will still continue to be a problem given that the eggs are in the hovercraft, and the spider knows that, even though they would be reverse ditching their friends in a sense, I don't know if that's the correct term, because they're going back to Retroville and have to explain all of this to their collective families, and even though they would die out here, make no mistake, they are still kids. Cindy waives all of that just to be with Jimmy. And that gesture in itself is what makes the episode so interesting to me. Status Quo has made a lot of episodes over the years pretty crappy when it comes to episodic shows. In fact, I'm pretty sure I can make a list on a lot of episodes that, because of Status Quo, the ending just sucked. But not here. As much praise as I'm giving Stranded, again, they showed us what the dynamic could have been. They've given us a lot of fan service within this episode. There's a lot of wholesome moments, and it was all logical and things you can look back on and understand. But the most important part of all of this is that them not being in a relationship at this point was fine because they ended it fine, because their feelings are still there. They just realize in a world full of peer pressure, differing school lives, Libby, Sheen, and Carl, and everything else, they are fine where they are. And most importantly, they know how they feel about each other. Plus, as the episode shows, they can always go back.
Cindy, for the last time, Australia is a country.
You're wrong, Neutron. Australia is a continent.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
To the hover car?
Right behind ya.
Solid episode. Anywho, check out these videos on this side. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And until next time, take care. Alpha out.